again to another episode of the 2K Weekly Podcast. It is week 12 of the 2023 season, and November 12th, fittingly enough, as now everything is coming to a head. It all comes down to these last 2 weeks for teams trying to fight in their conferences and fight for top bidding, trying to get to the BCS and the National Championship. Welcome, everybody. I'm Type A Joey 101, joined once again by my good friends Danny V and Pig Bear. And today was a very eventful week we had behind us now, and it's even more eventful coming up. So many races ended last week, and so many more are about to end this Saturday. I'm going to hand it off now to Danny for our headlines. Take it away.
Yeah, it was a really good weekend. But first, not still in Stillwater, Oklahoma State outlasts Baylor in overtime in our 2K stream. As of now, we have tickets clinched, where several teams have clinched their spots for their conference championship games, which we'll explain later. Next up, their first FBS wins. Everyone give a round of applause for Incarnate Word for getting their first FBS win against Sam Houston. Ranked Sam Houston, to be in fact. Next up we got chomped. Florida beats Auburn on the road. And finally, the Cinderella miracle is over. Old Dominion gets upset by William and Mary 34-24.
All right, we're going to begin our scores in a second, but we actually my thing is lagging kind of bad. Hang on, let me fix that. We actually begin this week with some breaking news out of the conference realignment circle, a big shocking event that came in just recently in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 just added San Diego State and Utah to their ranks to get to 12 teams, and they are not stopping there. They just announced the Mountain West's TCU and SMU to join the conference. Both teams hailing from the DFW area. Both were a little upset after not getting picked for major conferences in the last ring of realignments back in April through July. SMU, of course, was going to be in the Big 12, but they ended up team swapping with BYU. Meanwhile, TCU was not called at all to join a major conference, which really upset the Horned Frogs. They ended up working a deal with SMU to approach the Pac-12 and join the conference to become a 14-team conference. Now the second major conference with 14 teams joining the Big East. Danny, how do you think this move is going to affect both the Pac-12 and the college football landscape in the future?
Well, number one, you got these really two good teams in SMU and TCU. Both of them teams are really good in their respective conferences. Both of them have aspirational hopes to win their conference. And not just that, they also bring in a desirable market for the Pac-12. And with the additions of Utah, San Diego State, SMU, TCU in the same conference as Oregon, Stanford, and USC, it's gonna be fun to watch.
Another interesting question: what happens if you're a team like Boise State, or if you're the Mountain West? What do you do, Danny?
I would say add some teams. Look towards some other teams like maybe in the WAC, maybe in the Conference USA. Try grabbing some of those teams. Maybe if you're hopefully trying to aim high, maybe some Missouri Valley and MAC teams. Maybe.
Mac might end up being a bit of a stretch, but that might be an interesting proposition. Pigbear, what are your thoughts on this move?
I'm shocked. Like, you think, oh, conference realignment settle down. We're in November. Now conference realignment talks. This is shocking. And I think it's the right move for all right. As a geography standpoint, I hate this. I hate the additions of TCU and SMU. But if I'm the program, the AD at either school, I'm loving this. Schools on the money wise, but on tradition and regionality, horrible. But I think it's actually the right move overall. Sorry for the little jumble words there.
I wouldn't think it's too bad geographically speaking. There's not really many other options around. Colorado, very much locked in the Big 12, and BYU was just taken recently. Boise State is an interesting point because it seems that even in spite of teams like TCU SMU, BYU, San Diego State. Boise State has neither been invited or asked to be invited to a major conference. Maybe it has to do something with the market. Maybe they want to be in this conference to maintain their brand. Boise State has a national championship. They're the reigning national champions, and it's weird to see them not being targeted as of late. We're going to move on now from that to the conference that just moved. I forgot an omission I made. There was another conference that just moved to 14. That was the Big 12 with Houston and BYU. And in the Big 12, the two top teams faced off. Number 1, Oklahoma State hosting number 5, Baylor. OKSU had an explosive start. They got out to a 52-21 lead at one point. Or I believe a 52-20 lead at one point. However, that lead ended up dwindling throughout the game as the Baylor Bears ended up tying it at 59 before Oklahoma State stole it away in overtime, recovering a fumble on the first play for Baylor to seal off a much deserved win that does put a few question marks on this number 1 team in the nation. Danny?
Yeah, it was almost like an act of God, like something was controlling them to even lose that lead, for even to have Baylor even have that chance to come back. But that's how it is. Trust me, I know teams that have got big leads against Baylor and then somehow choked it. But definitely, it was a major game for Oklahoma State to win.
The difference of this team being they won. Pig Bear?
I'm just gonna have to say, even though they lost, what a will to fight back from Baylor.
Absolutely. Absolutely incredible almost comeback. Baylor still the odds-on favorite to rematch this team. Oklahoma State clinching themselves a berth in the Big 12 championship once again with the win. They'll be returning to Arlington this season. Now we're going to move on to another crucial game. Number 15, UTSA, having the best season they've ever had in the WAC. It's their final season in the WAC before they move to the CUSA. But New Mexico State gives them a little kick out the door. 42-17 the final. The Aggies clinch the division for the 5th time since joining the WAC in 2001. This is now their third trip to the WAC championship in the last 5 years. They won it in 2019 and 2021. Can they do it again in 23? Danny?
Yeah, it was a major game and a shocker because I thought UTSA would keep their momentum and maybe go to a BCS bowl game potential, but those dreams were shattered by the Aggies. And you know what? Since they lost against Northern Illinois week 1, they haven't looked back since. So good job on the Aggies.
UTSA, a very impressive team. They still have a tough test against Texas State to close their year, a Texas State team that hasn't been talked about that much, but have been performing pretty well. However, for New Mexico State, they've clinched the berth. This team just has so much experience on the roster that I feel like they've been, a large portion of that roster has been to a BCS Bowl before with the 21 Fiesta Bowl and the 2019 Cotton Bowl. This is a team who's been to the BCS Bowls twice in the last 5 years, maybe even a third time looking ahead. This is an impressive turnaround for this New Mexico State program. Pig Bear?
What a way for New Mexico State. Just you lost that first game and you just haven't looked back. Congrats on winning this one.
I'm going to pretend I heard that last bit. We're going to move to the SEC. Last week we saw Auburn with a big win over Georgia. This week they head back home to take on Florida, a Florida team who's performed extremely well against that same Georgia squad. However, Auburn looked pretty promising entering the matchup. They forgot to look at where they were ranked. They're number 7, and if you've watched this series at all so far, something just happens to the number 7. 35-28, number 9, Florida gets a win. Not a giant upset like we've seen earlier this season, but definitely one that puts the SEC on watch, as now Florida clinches the SEC East and will be heading to Atlanta for the first time since 2021. Danny?
Yeah, great win for Florida. They definitely fought hard and they it's not easy to go to Auburn and win there. So, congrats on the Gators for taking down the test.
Pig Bear?
Gators getting it done on the plains, just what away, and congrats on them for winning the SEC East Championship.
Up next, we head to the Big East Conference. A ranked matchup between West Virginia and Boston College. The Mountaineers putting on a show today in a huge upset, 31-28. The West Virginia Mountaineers keep on winning, and now their eyes are set on the backyard brawl. Danny?
Yeah, it was a major matchup for these teams, and I don't think it's gonna be the last time we're gonna see these guys, but we gotta see later on.
Pig Bear?
At West Virginia, good job, West Virginia, for being Boston College.
Both teams are favored to win their division, so we might see this matchup again in New Jersey for the conference championship. Meanwhile, staying with the Pig Bear team, Clemson, number 11 in the country, getting a win on the road against Maryland, 37-21, eliminating the Terps from competition. But obviously, this isn't the game that Clemson is looking at coming up. They're probably more focused on their next road matchup against number 2 Virginia Tech. As for Maryland, their season is still not over yet. They still have a lot to play for, because in this ACC, you're not just fighting for the conference championship, you're fighting for bowl eligibility. As right now, the Terrapins fall to 4-6. They need to win out, including a tough matchup at home against Virginia coming up, in order to have a chance to go bowling. Danny?
Yeah, it was a big game for both these teams, and Clemson, they could have been upset here, but definitely do think they had a great game against Maryland.
Pig Bear?
Yeah, going into Bird Stadium, I know how you just said we kind of. I mean, obviously, yeah. If you're a fan, the first thing on your mind should be Virginia Tech. But once again, remember, going into Bird Stadium is not an easy task to do. Maryland got a good environment up there in College Park. But now the focus is, can you slay the Giant? Number 2 in some cases, number 1 in most. Well, number 2 in most cases, number 1 in
Others.
some, and others. Virginia Tech. This is a ginormous game, and it's an ACC championship decider, if I'm not mistaken, right?
The winner nearly auto locks into the conference championship game. Now Virginia Tech's last conference loss was to Maryland last season. In fact, that might have been their last. There was their last loss overall. Was last season to the Terrapins. Maybe that's some magic on their side. We'll have to see on Saturday night. Meanwhile, in Ann Arbor, Michigan getting back the Little Brown Jug once again from Minnesota, 33-18. The Wolverines still in the hunt for that potential second spot in the Big Ten Championship. Michigan improving to 7-3. Meanwhile, Minnesota now falling to 4-6. They're in do or die mode in the Twin Cities. Danny?
Yeah, it was a great game for these teams, and for Michigan to win the Little Brown Jug that easily, it's not easy to win rivalry games, so glad they were able to get this big win for Minnesota. They're still reeling and hoping they could get that big win from a few years ago.
Pig Bear?
Yeah, good job, but Minnesota, they still have a chance of bowl eligibility, correct?
They are 4-6 right now. They still need.
Yeah, they could. They got some more weight.
They just lost to Michigan, so
It's do or die for their next 2 games.
they play Northwestern at home. They head on the road for Wisconsin to end their season.
I mean, it's possible. It's not too far out of the realm of possibility, but you just got to get locked in.
While we're talking about the Big Ten, not something we mentioned here on our scores, but Penn State getting a win over Ohio State, 37-29, means that the Nittany Lions have, for the first time since 2013, will be playing in the Big Ten championship game. They have locked themselves in 10-0, 6-0. Correction, it's 2018 was the last time they played the Big Ten championship game. The 10-0 Nittany Lions are having their best start since 2013. That's where I had mistaken. The next best odds look to be either Wisconsin, Ohio State, or Michigan. Wisconsin is 5-1 in conference play. Meanwhile, Ohio State and Michigan are both 4-2. Obviously, their two paths cross in their seasons. Michigan has Indiana. Ohio State, after the loss, will have to play Illinois before hosting the Wolverines. Wisconsin finishes with rivals Iowa and Minnesota. Now we move on. From that. I'm going to hand it off to Danny while he discusses Dave's show, Virginia Tech.
Dave's show. Where do we begin? You had such a promising season. Looking into it, you had big games, big opportunity to show yourself. Here you are, sitting at 5-5. They got off their big win against USF, and they were welcoming in number 2 Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech proved why they're the number 2 team in the country. Virginia Tech won 66-15. Dave's show currently sits at 500.
They're 4-6.
They're 4-6. Yeah, they are below 500. They need to win out to even get to a bowl game.
They play
their last 2 games includes at home against Florida State for the Gnome, and going on the road to Miami to finish it off.
We don't normally keep too many individual stats for these games, but I made sure to save this one for this call. Dave's show did not score a touchdown in this game. Those 15 points, they're all field goals. That's how bad this... 5 field goals in this game. That's how bad they were limited by Virginia Tech in this game in the air and on the ground. Just an ugly display. And while their last 2 games are both winnable, you got to play flawlessly in order to secure your final bowl bid as an independent before you head to the ACC next season. Pigbear?
Yeah, this is, again, do or die mode. Like, Minnesota's in do or die for a Dave show. And I believe this is maybe a little bit more doable than Minnesota, but still, you got to win out for Dave show. But hats off to Vatek. That's all.
Up next, Vatek, of course, playing Clemson next week before they head to Virginia. A Virginia team that's been very plucky as of late. Keep an eye out for that matchup to end the year. Meanwhile, we head to the Conference USA West, a de facto conference championship game in the final meeting between 2 rivals in conference. SMU and Houston will be both going their separate ways. Houston to the Big 12, SMU to the Pac-12. Now with our news coming in. SMU controlled this game for the largest part. Houston nearly fought their way towards a comeback, but the Mustangs hold them off. 32-28 the final. SMU improves the record now to 9-1, 7-0 in conference play, and officially clinch the Conference USA West. So Friday, December 1st, our game will be between UCF and SMU, a rematch of the game that will happen next week. On Saturday, UCF and SMU will face off against each other in conference play. The game will be in Dallas. The Knights are unbeaten. The Mustangs only have 1 loss. And this potentially will be a game that eliminates UCF from the BCS or puts either UCF or SMU in that conversation going on in the future. Once again, 32-28, SMU beating Houston and clinching a spot in the Conference USA title game. Danny?
Yeah, SMU had a horrific game against Houston, and, well, they are enjoying this victory for a while.
Pig Bear?
No, right off in the sunset, out west, California, in happiness while the Cougars stay put in Texas.
All right. I didn't know where you're going with that, but I'll take it.
Conferences, new conferences.
That's true. One more time, Friday, December 2nd, SMU and SMU UCF, a rematch of a Saturday night matchup. Now we move to the Mountain West, a race that's still wide open. Number 6 Boise State lost to BYU last week. They've lost to BYU 2 weeks ago. They're still recuperating. They had a close win over San Diego State. They head on the road to Logan to take on Utah State, a white-hot Aggie team performing one of the best seasons they've had since joining the Mountain West. And even in a blowout loss, the Aggies were still playing with fire. 52-24, Boise State gets the win, but their job isn't done yet. Wyoming and Air Force are Utah State's next 2 games. Boise closes the season with New Mexico on the road, but their biggest test is to come at home in Week 12. They take on a ranked TCU. Danny?
Yeah, that for Boise State to go out there and beat Utah State that badly, it was a little bit shocking, and I would have thought it'd been a bit more of a closer fight for Utah State, especially how they're on their best lead in a while.
Pig Bear?
Yeah, Boise State just got it done. Hats off to them.
Boise State currently the second best odds to make the conference championship game behind Utah. The Utah Utes could clinch a spot next week with a win over San Diego State and a Boise loss to TCU. Meanwhile, of course, the race still open for Utah State, but they are going to need some help. Namely with potentially a TCU win. Potentially with TCU win and some Utah and Boise losses. Beyond that, let's stay in the Mountain West for BYU, number 24 in the country, falling to San Diego State, 44-23. The Aztecs improve to I believe 7-3. Yeah, 7-3. Their final game in conference is at home against the Utah before they play UCLA on the road. As for BYU, they've had a tough stretch after their bye. They've got a big win over Boise, New Mexico, of course. But Utah State, TCU, and San Diego State now were all able to beat them. They finished with UNLV and the Holy War in Salt Lake City against Utah. Danny?
Yeah, for BYU, that was it's that. And for San Diego State, they've had themselves a extremely tough road. I mean, they had to play against Boise State, TCU, Utah, BYU, and UCLA. Not easy, but somehow the Aztecs are still winning big for the Aztec Empire.
Pig Bear?
The Aztec Empire expands, taking over lands in Utah.
Our next game up is in the future home of TCU and SMU in the Pac-10, also San Diego State and Utah. In the Pac-10, Washington State picking up a statement win over Arizona State 20-17. This sends the Cougars now to second place, still ahead of Stanford. The Stanford Cardinal lost last week to Arizona State. They got a win over USC this week. The Cougars are now only behind the Oregon Ducks, who clinched with a win over Washington, a spot in the Pac-12 championship game. Washington's next game is against Stanford. Washington State's next game is against Stanford in Palo Alto. The Cougars trying to clinch their first appearance in the Pac-10 championship game. It's really coming down to the wire here. Arizona State on the outside looking in now, falling to 4-3 in conference play. They would need all of the magic possible to shift in their favor, including Stanford beating Washington State and Wazoo losing out, as well as Stanford losing their final game to Cal. Danny?
Yeah, and I believe that this was especially a really good game for Washington State. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but Washington State was not really good last year. I believe they didn't go to a bowl game at all, and here they are sitting at number 2 in the pack. So definitely a good win for Arizona State. You're gotta be questioning how consistent are they? Or how consistent can your program be? Because, they go from 1 week defeating a top 10 Stanford to then losing to Washington State. You go from beating USC to then later on losing to Cal. And you have all these good wins, but also these bad losses. So you got to really question what's the state of the program so far.
And you gotta be consistent because your next game is Oregon. There's no room for failure there. Those strange things happen late in the season in Tempe, as I always say.
Yeah, you just asked Stanford that a few weeks ago.
That's true. Big Bear?
Yeah, Tempe, crazy place.
Or I mean about Washington State beating ASU.
Yeah, Washington State just good win, getting an upset whenever Arizona State.
Moving on, we have a game out west in Texas. Sam Houston State, undefeated up to this point, in the top 25 for the first time in school history this season. A truly dominant stretch of football they've been playing, and it all ends at a home game against Incarnate Word. 34-30 in double overtime. A promising Sam Hughes squad falls to a team who had not beaten a transition squad yet. Incarnate Word's last win was against Tarleton, who's still in transition. Sam Houston falling to the Cardinals in double overtime. This is to a team who lost to FCS Bemidji State. Danny, what do you make of this?
How? That's my question for Sam Houston State. How? You're playing at home. You were having a good atmosphere. You were heavily favored. You were just one game away from clinching the division. Just one. And you just lose. Double overtime. How?
And what that means now is Abilene is not out of it. Sam Houston's last games are Hardin Simmons and Stephen F. Austin. Hardin Simmons is third on the totem pole in the Southland right now. And Stephen F. Austin, reigning conference champions, had 12 wins last season. Or had 13 wins to their name last season. They're currently no team to slouch at. They're 7-3. They play a Nichols team this week that's been anything but consistent. There's a good chance Sam Houston not only loses to Stephen F. There's a chance that they don't even make the conference championship after their huge start. It's absolutely mind-boggling, Pig Bear.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, they always remember November. That's all I can really sum it up with.
All right, we're gonna move on now. One more game we're gonna talk about. This was, I believe, on a Friday. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
It was a Friday game. Jacksonville State and Charlotte, the de facto American Conference Championship game. The Gamecocks winning 23-17 means that our first conference champions of the 2023 football season are the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. Jacksonville State, this is their first conference championship since 2014 when they were in the Ohio Valley. This is their first and final year as members of the American Athletic Conference. Jacksonville State is in their third season as an FBS member. Their previous two in 21 and 22 were in the SoCon. The team will join the Sun Belt in 2024. Danny, your thoughts?
Yeah, great win for Jacksonville State, especially it went from a 4-win team to now winning their conference. I mean, yeah, sure, the American's not as good as SoCon, but still. The only way I can see Jacksonville State somehow choking this away is that they lose both of their final two games, which, seeing how it's against Tarleton, one potentially the worst team in the FBS, and Kennesaw, who is okay but not as good, Jacksonville State should easily just raise up that trophy soon. And for Charlotte, well, you're going to still be here, so therefore you got another chance at the American next year.
Pig Bear?
Yeah, just good job of Jacksonville State clocking in and clocking out.
They've done the exact same thing in the Gulf Star, formerly the Trans-American Athletic Conference. they won their, or they won the. Sorry, I'm messing up all my words. They are a member of that conference. I was thinking of Liberty, who won their first and last conference championship in what is now the Gulf Star last season. They are now a member of the Conference USA in full. And now we're going to move on to our top 25. A bit of shakeup, namely at the bottom rung. But we have a new member of our top 5 with Baylor's loss. And for the first time in a long time since I can remember, every single conference in the Power 5 has a team in the top 5. Starting with Oklahoma State and Virginia Tech at 1 and 2 for the Big 12 and ACC. The Pac-10 has the third spot in Oregon. Number 4 is Penn State, out of the Big 10, of course. And at number 5, finally putting an SEC team back in the top 10 top 5 rather, is Florida, out of the SEC. And we have 2 more conferences representing number 6 and 7. Conference USA's UCF, who's still unbeaten, and number 7 Boise State, who only has 1 loss to their name. Coming in at number 8 is Baylor, falling 4 spots after their loss this week to Oklahoma State. Number 9 Clemson, finally returning to the top 10, jumping 2 spots. And our top 10 is wrapped up with Utah, who jumps 4. 4 spots is our biggest rise in this top 25. Number 11, up 1 is TCU. 2 teams tie for our largest fall, the first being Auburn, who fell 5 spots after their loss to Florida. Number 13, Stanford jumps up 3 spots from last week. At number 14, Michigan falls 1, but it's not really any reason to get alarmed. It's namely due to Stanford rising above them. Meanwhile, Boston College falling 5 spots, ties with Auburn as our biggest dropper. And now at number 15, number 16, Wisconsin jumps 2 spots. Number 17 is Duke, who remains unchanged. Georgia jumping 1 spot to 18. At number 19, Pittsburgh hops up 1 spot. And at number 20, wrapping up the top 25, West Virginia hops 3 spots. Washington State jumps a spot up to number 21, followed by a debut into the top 25, at least for our 2KU sakes. SMU getting their first spot in the stream years. New Mexico State returns to the top 25 for the first time since week 0. The Aggies got the win over UTSA. UTSA is out of our top 25. Number 24, for the first time in school history, Jacksonville State is ranked, sitting at number 24. And at number 25, returning into the top 25 after missing out last week, is Mississippi State. The teams out of the top 25 this week are UTSA, Utah State, BYU, and Sam Houston. The other teams receiving votes this week: BYU, Kansas, UTSA, Utah State, Old Dominion, San Diego State, Northern Illinois, Tulane, Appalachian State, Sam Houston, Coastal Carolina, Alabama, and Louisville. Your thoughts on the top 25, Danny?
Yeah, a lot of good shakeups, especially welcoming in the Gamecocks with Jacksonville State. That's a great little thing. And, well, we got just a lot of diversity here with many different conferences, especially those that are within the 7 AQs.
The only team not up top with the AQs would be the Big East, though UCF will be a member of that conference next season. Pig Bear? Pig Bear, your thoughts on the top 25?
Baker.
All right, from that, we're going to move on. I'll hand it off to Danny, where we'll talk about the teams who have clinched bowl berths and those who are just about to. Take it away.
Yeah, we ourselves a lot less teams do have claimed bowl berths, but that's how it is later on we get the season. First up, we got UAB, who got themselves a win on the road at Tulsa. We have Central Michigan, who got a win at home against Northern Illinois. We have Colorado finally getting into a bowl game after they got a win against their rival Nebraska. We got Eastern Michigan, who got a win against Ball State. Really not balling there, but we have Georgia Tech, who honestly had a really shocker game. They beat Kentucky 35-30. Shocker. Shockingly close game. Next up, we go out super far out west into the islands of Hawaii, where Hawaii beat the favorite to win division, San Jose State, 21-14. We have the Irish of Notre Dame, who had themselves a really good win against his rival Northwestern. We have Ole Miss playing his, who, reminder of this, the past few years they've only gone around 2 to 3 wins a season. Finally got up to 6 wins this season, with their big win at home being against, like on the road at Tennessee. We got Purdue, who got themselves a good win at home against Illinois. We got Southeastern Louisiana. That's right, the East Division winner of the Southland last year, who got a win at Central Arkansas. We have Syracuse at the Big East, who got the bowl berth with a win at home against UConn. We got Texas Tech getting the bowl berth after winning at home against rival Texas A&M. We have Troy, who got themselves a win at home against Louisiana, which means they're still on their 6-game winning streak. That's right. They started the season 0-4, and they now 6-0 since then. Finally, wrapping out the teams who just made a bowl berth is Toledo, who got a win on the road at Marshall. For the teams knocking outside, it's a little reminder about the FCS rules. You guys should all remember this, but basically, if you want to fully clinch yourself a berth, you need to be 7-5 year in transition. Abilene Christian currently has 6 wins. They need to go to Northwestern State and win. So you got Arkansas going to East Carolina. You have Chicago playing against Western Illinois. You got Colgate playing against Navy. You got Eastern Kentucky, who is at that 6th win, but they could get their 7th by going on the road to Charlotte. You got Hardin Simmons playing at home against Sam Houston. Idaho playing at home against UTEP. Illinois trying to get the bowl berth by winning the Alipa against Ohio State. Indiana going to Ann Arbor to play against Michigan. Louisiana Tech playing against Texas State at home. I actually did a little typo right here, but McNeese State is supposed to be playing at home against Central Arkansas to get the bowl berth.
McNeese does not play
We have,
McNeese.
we have Michigan State going on the road to Purdue. We have Nevada playing at home against, I'm sure it's now going to be Rage Mode UTSA. You got Nichols going on the road to Stephen F. Austin. You have Northwestern State playing against, currently in transition, Abilene Christian. You have Pacific playing at home against Fresno State. You got Rutgers going on the road or playing at home against West Virginia. You got UConn playing in the jokingly name, the Cum Bowl against UMass.
We can't say that on this stream.
The UCUM
UMC Bowl. We can't say that on this stream. It's a family-friendly stream. You scared me. You scared me back into paying attention again. Sorry about that.
We got UNLV at BYU. We got the Battle of LA, USC, UCLA. That's a game. You have UTEP playing at home against Idaho to get a bowl berth. You got Wake Forest going to NC State, and Western Michigan playing at home against Buffalo. These teams are currently trying to get their 6 wins, and there's a little time left.
The only place for that type of language here is the Type A Joy 101 Discord, which you can join today by clicking on the link in the bio, or the link in the channel about page. Meanwhile, as for the actual stuff we have here, the actual teams on stream, who do you think has the easiest and hardest path this week to making a bowl berth?
That's going to be a little bit of a tough one, but I think the easiest game would have to be Arkansas going to East Carolina. And then for the hardest game, I'm going to have to say it's going to be Indiana and Michigan. I think that one's going to be a really tough game.
All right. We do have a lot of stuff coming next week. Our Heisman Wash. We'll announce our 5 Heisman finalists as well as we begin our lists for the playoffs next week. I believe that's actually week 13. Yeah, no, it would be next week. We begin our trek through the other levels with NCAA's Division III playoffs next week. Stay tuned on the Taipei Joy 101 Discord where we'll announce some playoff scores as well as who becomes the D3, D2, and FCS national champions. Meanwhile, also next week, we announced the 5 Heisman finalists. I already said that already? I'm pretty sure I did. But regardless, now we're quickly going to glance over our conference standings as the races begin to come to a head. Virginia Tech, starting in the ACC, leads the ACC standings right now. They can clinch with the win over Clemson. Meanwhile, Clemson rockets themselves up ahead of Virginia Tech. They'd fall to third in that scenario. The Hokies would fall to third in that scenario behind Duke and Clemson. Duke clinches if they win out. And Clemson for sure needs to win against Vatek. We already saw the race come to a close in the the American. Blanking on words right now. So we're going to move on to the Big East. Syracuse with the win and Boston College with the conference loss means the race is still open. BC and Syracuse face off against each other the final week. So that could really come down to 1 week as well. However, BC needs to win out. Syracuse also needs to win out. It's really 1v1 there. I believe UConn has now been eliminated with the loss to Syracuse.
Yep.
Meanwhile, once again, it's still the backyard brawl for Big Ten. I can't speak today. Big East championship eligibility. Both teams are undefeated in conference play. Pitt has Temple this week. West Virginia has Rutgers. Both teams will face off against each other in Morgantown to determine, more than likely, who will be going to the conference championship game. Into the Big Ten, Penn State, as we mentioned, did clinch a berth to Indy. Right behind them are Wisconsin, Ohio State, and Michigan, all the teams who are still in the hunt for spots. Long shot. There's still long shots like Notre Dame and Purdue, but likely they'll get eliminated this week. Wisconsin in second has Iowa and Minnesota. Michigan has Indiana and Ohio State, as we mentioned. And Ohio State has Illinois and Michigan remaining on their schedule. Unfortunately, with Michigan State's win over the Hawkeyes, Iowa's 1 in a million run ends here. But they could still play spoiler in that game against Wisconsin, potentially. We now move to the Big 12, where Oklahoma State clinched a berth. The Cowpokes were the favorites all year, and they finally managed a spot for themselves. Meanwhile, Baylor sits in second still, even with the loss. Kansas State, Kansas, Texas Tech, and Nebraska are looming. I think actually Nebraska got eliminated with a loss to Colorado. So it's really the two Kansas schools and maybe Texas Tech in the hunt for that last spot. Tech has Oklahoma State and Colorado to wrap their season. Right now, either Baylor or Kansas look the most likely to get that final spot. Baylor only with one more conference game. That's against Colorado. Their last game is against TCU. KU has Missouri and Kansas State. They need Baylor to lose to Colorado in order to clinch, or in order to take the reins. K-State would need a similar result. They play Texas and Kansas to wrap their year. Same thing with Tech, who finished with Oklahoma State and Colorado. To the CUSA, which is already clinched, we already mentioned, UCF and SMU will face off against each other. In terms of bowl berths, still only Army is clinched, though Colgate is 1 win away. Both Dave Show and Holy Cross would need to win out to make bowl eligibility. Into the Ivy League, Columbia still running away with it, trying to win back-to-back Ivy League titles. Princeton is second at 4-1 in conference play. The Lions and Tigers collide in Week 13 to end their seasons. Cornell is Columbia's other game, while Princeton's other game is against Brown. In terms of bowl eligibility, Columbia is the only team set. Princeton could clinch with a win next week over Brown, which would lead into that Columbia matchup. Cornell.
Well, it was the top 2 or 3 teams in the Ivy League, so that's still a little bit of discussion until we find out who were those top.
The Ivy League has 3 berths this season to the Garden State, Pinstripe, and Fenway Bowls new this season. Currently, the spots look to be going to Columbia, Princeton, and Harvard. Onto the MAC. The MAC East is still open. Kent State sits on top at 5-1. There are 3 4-2 teams right behind them: Miami, Buffalo, and Akron. Currently, you ask me, I think Buffalo has probably the easiest route ahead. Marshall's Kent State's next game, and they finish with a road game against the Zips. Akron plays Youngstown in their final game before their battle for the wagon wheel. Miami, Ohio would need to win out against Ohio and Ball State to get it. The MAC West has whittled itself down. Northern Illinois with the loss to Central Michigan, a revenge game for last season. It's now a matchup between the two of the 3 Michigan schools for that championship spot. Eastern and Central Michigan will face off against each other on Wednesday. To the Missouri Valley. It's currently all Southern Illinois all day. They got the win over Chicago that they needed. They play Missouri State and Western to wrap the year. However, there are still some weird scenarios in which teams who are barely hovering over 500 could make it. Drake, for example, is still in it, as is Western Illinois. Western plays Southern in the final game of their season. And Drake, a team who started the season 1-5, could make the Missouri Valley Championship if they get wins against Indiana State and Missouri State. And Missouri State and Western Illinois beat SIU. Drake would also need Chicago to beat the Leathernecks. In the Missouri Valley West, currently South Dakota State, I'd say, would be in control, but Northern Iowa has passed them with the win over Southern Utah. The Panthers made the conference championship last season, losing to North Dakota State in the Snoozer Bowl, as I'll call it. Northern Iowa plays the other top 2 teams in NDSU and SDSU in their final 2 weeks. South Dakota State plays UNI and South Dakota. And North Dakota State, on the other hand, gets Utah Tech and Northern Iowa. So it's really a 3-dog race, and one of those dogs will be eliminated next week. As we mentioned, the Mountain West is still wide open. Utah holds on to the lead at 5-1. Boise State also 5-1 in conference play, followed by 5-2 TCU and New Mexico, 4-2 Utah State, as well as 4-3 San Diego State, and 3-3 BYU. Into the Pac-10, Oregon, with the win over Washington, punches their ticket to LA. The path is still open for the next 3 teams behind them, though. Washington State, Stanford, and Arizona State are sitting at 6-1, 5-2, and 4-3, respectively. Moving to the SEC, and where Florida has clinched a bid thanks to their win over Auburn. The 9-1 and 5-1 Gators will be returning to will be returning to Atlanta. Meanwhile, Auburn one more win away from clinching it themselves. They need the win over Vanderbilt to secure a spot. Right behind them, though, now, Mississippi State and Tulane both would need help from each other as well as Alabama to win it. Meanwhile, in the SoCon, Old Dominion, with the loss to William & Mary, which we mentioned in our headlines, now sets up a scenario where all three teams could tie for the conference lead. Old Dominion has one more conference game, as does James Madison, since they played each other in the first games of the year. ODU and JMU, who could tie with William & Mary, because Old Dominion beat James Madison and lost to William & Mary. William & Mary beat Old Dominion and lost to James Madison, and James Madison beat William & Mary, but lost to Old Dominion. Old Dominion plays the Citadel. James Madison plays Chattanooga. William & Mary has two more conference games against Washington and Lee and Richmond. We would go into tiebreakers if all three teams won out in conference play. Meanwhile, in the SoCon South, it comes to a head on Saturday. Every other team has eliminated themselves from contention is now App State and Georgia Southern, facing off one last time as SoCon foes before they both moved to the Sun Belt. App State, the one-loss Mountaineers, are favored to move on to Nashville. We head to the Southland Conference, where the Southland East is now Stephen F. Austin's to win. The 7-3 Lumberjacks are 5-1 in conference play and could clinch with the win. And could clinch if they win out through Sam Houston. Behind them are Central Arkansas and Southeast Louisiana. UCA would have a tiebreaker if they win out. UCA would have a tiebreaker, but they would need Stephen F. Austin to lose potentially to Sam Houston. Speaking of, Sam Houston, even with the loss, are still the favorites to win the division outright. Though, as we mentioned earlier, there's still a route where they don't make it, thanks to Northwestern State and Incarnate Word being the next games up for Abilene, and Sam Hugh having to play both Hardin Simmons and Stephen F. Austin. Now the Sun Belt, FAU and Coastal played a hard-fought game this weekend, in which the Owls returned to the conference championship game for the first time since 2021, beating the Chanticleers and getting revenge for last season. FAU has not clinched it yet because they could still lose out, and Coastal could lap them then. A win over Troy or a Coastal loss would clinch it for them. And meanwhile, out west, even with all of this, there's still room for competition. Troy is 6-0 in conference play. They haven't lost since they're out of conference games. Even then, they could slip up because they play FAU in South Alabama. Now, South Alabama plays Louisiana Monroe and then a road game against rival Troy. Arkansas State is in the hunt as well. They play FIU this week and Louisiana Tech as a non-conference closer. North Texas plays Western Kentucky as their final conference game this week. However, all these three teams would need help elsewhere in order to knock off Troy from that top spot. We head to the WAC where we saw New Mexico State clinch it in the Pacific. In the Pacific Division, things are still pretty close. Fresno State now shifts to the favorite. They play Pacific and San Jose State to wrap their year. Hawaii actually leapfrogs San Jose State due to tiebreakers. The Rainbow Warriors play Cullen Payton and Pacific to wrap their year. SJSU finishes with CSU Fullerton and their rivals Fresno State. San Jose State still has a path to it, but they would also need help from Pacific. And that will wrap our conference race discussion. Now we're going to move on to the matchups for Week 13. Or Week 12, pardon me. We're going to get things started on Wednesday night for Eastern Michigan, Central Michigan in Ypsilanti. The Eastern Michigan Eagles trying to return to the MAC title game. They were so close last season, but lost to Northern Illinois, which gave Central a tiebreaker and sent them to Detroit. Meanwhile, Central trying to avenge last season's disappointment in Detroit. The last thing they need to do to return there would be beating Eastern Michigan on Wednesday. I'm thinking I'll try to be here in time to do that game in call. We'll have to see. The odds favor Eastern Michigan by 6.5. I agree with them here. Danny, who do you have?
Give me the Eagles to win. I believe Eastern Michigan will win this one close.
All right. Pig Bear, you there? I'm going to assume not. We'll move on now. Move on now to an in-state rivalry. I don't know the official name of it, but it's New Mexico and number 21 New Mexico State. NMSU, of course, invigorated by a win over UTSA. We'll be playing this game on Friday night in order to secure an unreal an unreal fifth straight 10-win season of 10 wins or better. Last time they had less than 10 wins was when they went 9-4 in 2018. Meanwhile, New Mexico is playing out of their minds this season. New Mexico State favored by 8.5. I actually like New Mexico to pull off the upset here. Danny?
It's called the Rio Grande rivalry.
All right.
So, yeah, but give me New Mexico State to win this one close. It is a tough rivalry game, and I believe the Aggies will win this one.
All right, up next, Troy can clinch a spot in New Orleans for the conference championship of the Sun Belt if they beat FAU on Friday. The Owls have already punched their ticket. This might be a forecast of things to come on Friday night. This one doesn't have a line, but I think the Owls would end up being favored here. I'd take them in this one. Danny?
Yeah, give me FAU to win this one. I believe FAU will win this one pretty easily and should beat Troy and break their streak.
We have another ranked matchup out of the SEC. Number 18 Georgia heads to Starkville to take on number 25 Mississippi State. The Bulldogs are favored by 3 in this one. Who do you got?
Give me the Dogs. I believe the Bulldogs will win this one.
Staying in the SEC, Ole Miss heads to Tulane, a Green Wave team still trying to chase Auburn for that SEC West spot. The Green Wave favored by 6 in this one at home in Narlands. Who do you have?
Give me the Green Wave. I believe they're going to roll their way into New Orleans and beat the Rebels.
All right, up next, Conference USA Championship preview from Dallas. UCF favored by 6.5 against the SMU Mustangs. Who do you have, Danny?
Give me the Knights. I believe UCF, they're playing the best they have been, and I believe UCF will go down to Dallas and beat the Mustangs.
Our next game, we return to the SEC. LSU heads to number 5 Florida. I feel like we expected this to be a lot better earlier on in the year, especially for LSU. But Florida's performing way better than we had thought that they would, given their performance last year. The Gators are favored by 18 in this game. Who do you have? Danny?
Yeah, give me the Gators to win this one. It should be a pretty easy matchup for them.
Up next, the battle for the Heartland Trophy as number 16 Wisconsin heads to Iowa. The Badgers favored by 14. I like to live dangerously. Give me Iowa in an upset. Danny?
Yeah, this game speaks trap game for me. I could see Iowa potentially pulling off the upset, but give me the Badgers to win this one.
I say there are 2 destinations you do not want to play late in the season. Tempe and Iowa City. Those are the home of the trap game. Our next stop, SoCon South de facto championship, as it's been for quite some time. Georgia Southern and Appalachian State. App State favored by 4.5 in this one. Who do you have?
Give me App State to win this one.
Up next, some Pac-12 after dark action, as it'll be known next year. First off, number 3 Oregon heading on the road to Tempe to take on Arizona State. Ducks favored only by 7, naturally due to all the things that could happen in Tempe in November. Now, Arizona State is nothing to slouch at. They've performed pretty well, though they are coming off a loss to Washington State. I'm going to take Oregon in this one, though. Who do you have?
Yeah, give me Oregon to win this one. I know Arizona State is usually a tough place to play, but give me the Ducks to win this.
What will be a Pac-12 matchup next season? Number 10 Utah going to Snapdragon to take on San Diego State. The Utes are favored by 5 in this game. I like Utah to win and potentially punch their ticket into the Mountain West Championship game in Denver. Danny?
I agree with you. Give me Utah to win this game.
All right, one more game for us. A ranked Pac-10 matchup. Number 22 Washington State heading to Palo Alto to take on number 13 Stanford. The Cardinal are favored by 5.5 in this one, though they've looked a little suspect lately. Danny, who you got?
I'm gonna just give me the upset. Give me Washington State to win this.
This could potentially choose who clinches that final spot in the conference championship game. Up next, we have our 2 games on Game of the Week. Once again, we're going to have a doubleheader. Man, these 2 matchups were way too good to ignore. Number 11, TCU, and number 7, Boise State will start us off. If you remember back last season, a top 5 matchup between Boise State and TCU led to one of the greatest games in 2KU history, as Boise beat the Frogs in Fort Worth. This is the revenge game. TCU looking to spoil Boise's chances at a BCS spot. Meanwhile, Boise trying to remain perfect to wrap up the year. Even after that loss to BYU, Boise favored by 8.5 at home on the Smurf turf. Who's going to win this game, Danny?
Give me the Broncos. I believe they have enough firepower. I believe they're going to win this, and it's at home. And I believe the Smurf turf will be bouncing.
All right, I think Pig Bear is out right now, but we have one more game here. Since the season started, we circled our calendars for Week 12 as number 9 Clemson takes on number 2 Virginia Tech. The Hokies have been perfect all year. When we last saw them, they embarrassed Georgia Tech in the opener. Meanwhile, Clemson has had flashes of questions show up, namely in games against LSU and Duke. Could the Tigers nab a huge upset in Lane Stadium? We'll have to find out. Vatek favored by 4.5. I think the spread is a little generous towards Clemson, but I think this will be a good game. Give me Virginia Tech to win it, though. Danny?
Give me Virginia Tech to win as well, but I believe it's going to be a pretty close matchup. Both these teams are high flying, and I believe both of them are rolling on all cylinders. But Tech has enough to win this.
I'll check one more time. Earth the Pig Bear. All right, I'm just going to assume Pig Bear takes Clemson to win this one. All right, thank you all for watching today's 2KU weekly episode. Don't forget to join us both on the server on Wednesday as Central and Eastern Michigan clash for a MAC championship appearance, and on Saturday night for the doubleheader. Thank you all for watching, and so long from the 2KU.